Hello, and greetings to all of our RRS members, friends, and visitors. Today we have the pleasure of hosting the educational webinar of Cultivating Resilience, Considerations and Strategies for Progress in a Difficult Time by Dr. Rachel Andrews and moderated by RRS President, Dr. Susan Bailey. So the format for today's webinar will begin with an introduction by Dr. Bailey. Then the feature presentation by Dr. Andrews, and followed by a question and answer segment. So please submit your questions in the Q&A section or chat box to the right, and they'll be read aloud by myself at the end. So without further ado, Dr. Bailey.
Well, thank you, Jordan, and thank you all too for attending this very first webinar in our educational outreach series that RadRes is initiating, so that in an effort really to make good use, a positive use of this time, perhaps extra time that we all have during the shutdown. And this will be, in fact, our first one, so it's a real pleasure to launch this webinar with Dr. Andrews. And so we also want to just highlight the fact that we are initiating a lot of efforts, more learning opportunities, including this webinar series, which will be a regular feature for some amount of time to come. Our next one we're looking forward to is a review with Dr. Brian Cantor of our winter workshop that was recently held in Montana. But other efforts are also underway and being developed, and these include discussion forums with our Rad Women in Science group, our early investigators group, as well as other special topics like the coronavirus, of course, and other things like developing an e-journal club to really stimulate discussion and to keep all of our conversations going. I mean, that really is the point here. There will also be a number of vodcasts, things that even we've already got that have featured a lot of our senior members, or various other topics that may be of interest to our readership, so our membership. So please be keeping an eye on the RadRes webpage and keeping updated on all of that. I think too, I'd like to just take a moment to mention that we are certainly going full steam ahead with our plans for the Hawaii meeting in October, our annual meeting. So plans are underway, and certainly we're exercising due diligence and keeping aware of current events. But those plans are on schedule, and please keep track of all of our new deadlines because they have been extended. So with that, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Rachel Andrews, who is a veterinary pathologist and has been a member of the Radiation Research Society since 2004. She's one of our ECI members, and she's currently an assistant professor in radiation oncology at Wake Forest School of Medicine. Her laboratory is dedicated to studying the pathogenesis of radiation-induced brain injury, and she received her Bachelor's of Science degree from the University of Illinois in 2010, and her Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from the University of Wisconsin in 2014. After that, she completed a fellowship in comparative medicine at Wake Forest School of Medicine, and obtained her PhD in molecular medicine and translational science in 2018. She's also board certified with the American College of Veterinary Pathologists. So prior to her scientific career, which I thought was really interesting, is that she's a very active outdoorsman with an interest in wilderness survival and leadership. And as part of that, she served as a low ropes course instructor at the Philmont Scout Ranch. That's in New Mexico, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Yep. And focused on development of communication and team building skills in visiting scout troops. So really an impressive and diverse background that's very appropriate for our discussion today on considering or cultivating resilience and how we can have better strategies for progress during difficult times, certainly as we find ourselves in our current situation. So she's going to tailor her comments specifically to radiation labs and clinics, folks and how we might all work together and getting back to work more effectively and more quickly. So Rachel, we really look forward to your comments and thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. This one, and then, all right. So can everyone see everything just fine?
It looks good to me.
We are good to go. Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. Thank you very much. It's my honor to be asked to speak here today. I'm really looking forward to talking about resilience and what we can do to adapt in these difficult times. So as Dr. Bailey mentioned, my background before I became a scientist was I was actually really interested in outdoor survival, particularly leadership and how to deal with crisis situations. And so these are some of the pictures from when I worked out at Philmont, but also when I was in a high school backpacking group where I was a teaching assistant. So what I want to do today is talk not only about laboratory operations and research-oriented tasks, but also I want to talk more broadly about coping mechanisms that'll help enable adaptability and resilience so that we're well positioned for success during the recovery period. Okay. So we're currently experiencing a global pandemic which has widespread effects on socioeconomic, psychological, and physical well-being. And this has ramifications not only at the international and national levels, but it's also profoundly personally has personal effects. And so disaster affects this, hold on, I'm gonna have to move this thingy or minimize it.
We're good. We see just the screen. You're good. We just see the
Okay,
buttons.
I can't actually see my screen very well. All right, better? Everyone good? Okay. So disaster affects the social structure and it also creates an immense barrier on the usual functioning of society. And so what people have found is that this can be neutralized by willingness for positive psychological adjustment and the ability of the community to adapt to the environment. And I really wanted to just state this right off the bat. It's completely normal to feel increased levels of stress and uncertainty right now. So what I want this talk to do is really help develop and cultivate tools to enable this adaptability, but also increase confidence in your ability to cope with and handle the situation. So what is resilience? Resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. As much as resilience involves bouncing back from these difficult experiences, it can also involve profound personal growth. Resilience is coping under pressure to achieve success and is also mental preparedness for future situations and vulnerabilities. So in other words, resilience is like being like bamboo. This is often said for resilience. And so you want to bend in strong winds and not be like a rigid oak tree that may break. So basically, resilience is what occurs following a stressor or a challenging event. And we've had numerous of these in society over the last year already. There have been tornadoes in the Midwest, there's the forest fires out in Australia, and then the COVID virus. However, resilience is a set of skills that will allow you to withstand these trials versus brittleness, which is the opposite set of strengths. So what are some characteristics of resilient populations? Resilient populations have what is called an internal locus of control. So instead of sitting there and being like, all of these things are happening outside, you realize that events are influenced by actions and they're not just attributed to bad luck or fate. It also increases confidence in your ability to handle the events. Resilient populations are also accepting, so not only of themselves and of what they're feeling at a given time, but it also allows them to acknowledge and accept the present situation. So this is the world right now, and that's okay. Resilient populations are optimistic. They try to keep a positive outlook. And in keeping with that, they have a positive future orientation. So they're determined and persistent in achieving their goals, but they're also acknowledging that that may require flexibility and adapt to challenges, limitations, and setbacks. Resilient populations are also insightful. So this means that you introspect. You look at your emotional state instead of just experiencing it passively, and so you perceive and you monitor one's own emotions. They also have good regulation of negative emotions and behavior. So this includes impulse control. So resilient populations are less likely to do things like go out and buy all the toilet paper right now, and they're less likely to lash out in times of stress. Finally, resilient populations have a strong degree of interpersonal connectivity. So they have strong social connections, they communicate their emotions without negativity, and they tend to be very empathetic and relate well to others. So what are some productive and mitigating strategies in times of disaster? One, you increase your internal locus of control. So you focus on how can I adapt, not why is this happening to me? You also develop plans in order to be able to adapt to things based off these experiences, and this will enable you to respond more effectively in the future. You can cultivate acceptance and optimism. The past cannot be changed, but you can look towards the future. You should do something meaningful, personally meaningful, every day. So whatever that means to you, whether or not it's cooking or mindfulness or connecting with others, you should do something every single day. You should also be planning and proactive, so use this time well. And take breaks from the news and other media. So I've been talking to some people, and a lot of people I've reached out to have said that the news is really stressing them out right now. So it's actually really important right now to kind of cultivate a healthy relationship with the media. So don't fixate, don't have the news on constantly. It's important to check in and get status updates, but don't allow it to ruin your day. It's really important right now to support your physical and mental health. So get adequate sleep, healthy nutrition, exercise, and then mental health as well. So introspect, analyze what you're feeling. And then finally, stress reduction techniques are essential right now, such as yoga, mindfulness, deep breathing exercises, and seek mental health seek the assistance of a mental health care professional if you need it. Also, especially in times of isolation like this, it's really important to build, cultivate, and maintain strong social connections. Fortunately, we're living in the digital era, and so this is made really easy by things like Skype, WebEx, FaceTime, even just a cell phone call, or things like webinars. Reach out to members of your faith or spiritual community if that's applicable to you. Okay, so what are some considerations for practically coping with the new reality? So we're making this massive transition from a laboratory data generation focused occupation to now we're working at home and we're disconnected from things like the experiments that we're running. And so what can we do to enable success? So what I'm going to talk about first is considerations for the laboratory and workspace management, including this push to move from laboratories to essential operations, and then about establishing a home workspace. I'm also going to talk about how you can cope on a personal level, both professionally and in your own social life. And then I'm also going to offer some recommendations for laboratory and trainee management and education, what you can continue to do to keep those relationships going forward and productive. So laboratory considerations. First, follow your institutional guidelines for essential operations. Nothing I'm going to say here should supersede anything that you're already been instructed to do. However, one of the things we're doing at my institution is that we've been told to identify key essential personnel and the tasks necessary for bare minimum laboratory function. So some of these things are animal care and welfare evaluations, enrichment, but also essential equipment monitoring. So making sure your dewars have enough liquid nitrogen to maintain samples, monitoring of temperature maintenance for your freezers, and also consideration is CO2 levels in incubators, and if possible, freezing down cell lines for repopulation once everything's back up and running. We've been working really hard to identify strategies to limit in-person time required. So some of the things that we've found have been really successful and helpful are implementing remote temperature monitoring systems in units so that we can actually do the temperature checks on the freezers without having to go into the hospital in person. We've also consolidated essential samples and supplies to central locations. So instead of who has ever been designated as the temperature checker for that day, instead of having to go to several different lab spaces, they're able to just look inside 1 or 2 or 3 freezers and be able to leave. Finally, we collaborate with adjacent or shared space laboratories so that instead of each laboratory having an individual go in every day, we've reduced that to 1 person who can check 3 labs in our department. So we found that to be helpful too. Finally, communicate any needs or concerns you have with your department or relevant supervisory body. So our department's been really supportive and actually helping us get that temperature monitoring system up and running, and they've been really responsive to our needs right now. Okay, so now that we're working from home, it's really important to develop and maintain a work routine. So my recommendations for this are to establish a set working space. So an office, a kitchen table, ideally not your bed. It should be separate from your sleeping space because this aids in focus and it also helps you maintain your sleep cycle. So your bedroom should just be your private space to wind down in the evening. You should maintain a standard work routine. So I know it's really tempting right now to start the workday later or take little digressions and go cook or do something else. But it's really important, especially for when we're going to be recovering, to have the standard routine still in place. So I recommend that you keep your normal work preparation procedures. So get up, shower, do your makeup, get some coffee, whatever it is you normally do in the morning, keep to that schedule. You should also adhere to set working hours. So this means 2 things. So start work at the same day every day, but also cease working at the end of the day. So there have been a couple of publications out there about how work days are actually increasing in length because people aren't able to put their work down now that it's with them at home. But it's really important for your mental health to have a definitive end of the workday and be able to step away from that. My other recommendation is to be on the clock. When you're working, you're not doing other things. So if you're sharing a quarantine space with others, try to be clear about expectations. And this can be really difficult, especially now that people's significant others are home or if they're having childcare that they're supposed to do. So one thing that I saw that looked really helpful is actually block scheduling childcare. So establish time for one person to work while another person is able to look after the kids and then switch off. And back to being on the clock, avoid fragmenting your work day. So if you're trying to intersperse chores with your work, it markedly reduces your ability to focus and be productive. Really important, now that we're home and we have comfortable spaces, please remember to stand and walk 1 to 2 minutes every 20 to 30 minutes. It's good for your health and reduces your risk of developing blood clots. Okay, so personal and professional development. These are just some of my own recommendations. I would love to hear at the end of this webinar other people's recommendations to continue productivity, but I've been trying to really aggressively clear all those backlogged projects that have been hanging out around. So that lingering manuscript that you've always been meaning to poke at but never quite seems to get finished, just sit down, pound it out, see what you can get done. Also partially analyze data sets. So we're working currently right now on clearing out some histopathology that has been kind of backlogged in the lab, but also studies that never quite got completed or need additional work. And so while you can't go in and do the studies that you need to do, you can at least make a concrete plan on steps for publication and get that languishing data out. Another great thing to do right now is review those articles that are awaiting your peer review. And then other occupational training exercises with upcoming deadlines. So things that normally get put off during the busy workday, now we can focus on. And upcoming abstracts for meetings like Hawaii. Okay. So also continue scientific progress. So consider reaching out to data and sample repositories. While we might not be able to get new samples, you may actually be able to do some data mining right now, or at least establish those relationships and be able to source material for continued project development once everything's up and running. So some examples of this are the NASA Ames Institutional Scientific Collection Biospecimen Sharing Program, which is a mouthful, but also NASA has Gene Lab, which has data mining potential as well. There's a number of these different resources, and so I've actually provided a list of some of them at the end of this talk, and I'll make sure I linger on that slide so people can screen cap if needed. Another thing that we can do right now is develop focus groups for networking and problem solving. So we can bring together experts from complementary disciplines, maybe ones that don't normally interact with each other, and then make focused problem solving groups to develop novel situations. Cultivate a social media presence. So this is something that I find that I don't usually have enough time to do in my week, but update and curate your own laboratory research web presence as your institution allows. Get things out there like papers, preprints, images that your lab is generating. Create a mission statement for your lab or research summaries of what you're currently doing. And finally, you can update outdated materials. So things like facilities and resources for grants boilerplate, update your CV, your LinkedIn profile, and other relevant scientific social media. You can also do continuing education, and so it's a great time to develop new skill sets to benefit your career. So some of these areas that I found particularly interesting are courses in leadership and management, which are really appealing to have on a CV. You can get advanced certifications in data science, which is a really exciting area to me. Increase foreign language skills. And there are a number of resources that actually offer free online education materials. And so I am gonna have a slide at the end where I list several of them, but Coursera is a fantastic resource, edX, and then a lot of universities actually have websites where they have online coursework as well. Finally, this is a good time to get through coursework and seminars for maintenance of professional certifications if you have to keep up with CE for something like that. And finally, I just wanted to talk about volunteer opportunities. And so this is a great time to do COVID-19 response work if it's applicable or appropriate for your situation and if you're comfortable with that. But as scientists, we have a unique skill set. And so many places are trying to get increased diagnostic testing capacity and maybe reaching out for volunteers. And then a number of people in RadRes are also medical professionals. And so I know that they need patient screening as well. You can develop set webinars and seminars for professional associations. And this is also a really good time to develop teaching materials. So I've been working on a couple lectures that I've been wanting to put together. Aside from your work life, right now it's important to take care of your personal life as well. So admittedly, this is a very stressful time. There's been a lot of upheaval and change, and everyone has to adapt. So it's really important to reduce stress. So things like aromatherapy, practice mindfulness at least once a day. As I mentioned before, nutrition, sleep, and work-life balance are really important right now. I'll reiterate, please put your laptop down and spend some time by yourself in the evening. And it's a good time to cultivate hobbies and relationships. And once again, take breaks from media. It's difficult, as I mentioned before, to cultivate social relationships right now with social distancing, but stay connected to family and friends or reach out to old friends and use digital communication methods. One idea I had was to have a standing social evening. So if you normally get together with your friends, say on Friday afternoons or something, develop a social e-meeting. You can do things like video conference board games. If you're into tabletop gaming, you can do that. There's multiplayer online games that you can do, or even just have a discussion over coffee. And finally, go outside and get some exercise, but check your local COVID shelter-in-place requirements for that. Okay, so management of laboratory personnel and trainees. This is one of the biggest things when I've been talking to my colleagues, particularly in the veterinary field, is that communication and transparency are so important right now because there's a lot of confusion and people want to know what's going on. So it's really important that people know that they're being protected and that they're being heard right now. I really recommend so you make a set schedule for yourself, but also do that for your lab. So maintain a set schedule and routine for personnel. So maintain your regular laboratory e-meeting or your laboratory meetings, but by video or phone conferencing. I recommend this once weekly. However, my technician and I have a huddle once a day just to update and make sure everything's still on track. This is a great time for continuing education for laboratory members. So I really recommend that you continue regular mentoring meetings by voice and video conferencing. But this is a good time to start suggesting that students do things like review articles or work on the first chapter of their dissertation or abstracts, or even mock grant proposals if there's not an applicable deadline coming up. This is a great time to get people to work on those skills. As Dr. Bailey mentioned, e-journal clubs are really exciting right now, and I think that's a fantastic idea. And then also initiate new research projects that leverage mining of archived data sets. So great opportunities for this are like MRI and CT images where you can actually work with them remotely and don't have to go in and put hands on something. Analyze demographic data or even large-scale omics data sets. So you can either do, if you've already analyzed the entire data set, go back and look at focused pathway sub-analyses, or try to develop correlative projects looking at clinical outcomes or risk factors. And so a learning opportunity from what's been going on right now has been that it's really important to cross-train all or multiple personnel in essential laboratory tasks, because now as we have to identify essential personnel and limit in-person time, it's really difficult if every single person does one specialized sub-thing, because then everyone's essential. So in the future, consider cross-training all or multiple personnel and then check once every 6 months to make sure that you continue that process as people join or leave the lab. Okay, so looking to the future and planning is part of resilience. So what can we do to position ourselves for success once things start recovering? So I think it's really important to develop a strong plan of action for personnel redeployment and timelines for resumed lab function. Try to set realistic goals. The first day everything's back up and running is probably not realistic, but there's also, you have to consider things for gear up time. And so what equipment needs maintenance, what supplies are expired or low, what needs reordering, because those are things that can be done as things start recovering. We can learn from our mistakes and identify how we can improve function should these emergency situations occur in the future. So as I mentioned before, cross-training personnel has been identified to me as something that's really important, but also we learned autonomous equipment monitoring. So also explore potential upsides to this positioning in rapid recovery. So this is a time where we can be incredibly academically productive, since we don't have things like standing meetings and other things like that that typically fragment the day and take up time. So write review papers, get those papers out like I mentioned before. But also we can volunteer. So scientists possess a unique set of skills that are really essential right now during this time of crisis. So if you have clinical skills, our benchtop skills, crisis management skills, all of these are needed right now. And finally, this is a great opportunity for leadership. So within our community and beyond it, we can cultivate a reputation for going above and beyond during this time of need. So a final note on resilience. So resilience is not a one-time phenomenon or a rare trait that just some people have. It's actually the result of practicing skills that enable adaptivity and perseverance with grace. And so practicing these techniques now actually are going to give you a tool for coping with major and minor life hardships in the future. Okay, so these are some resources that I've gathered on just resilience and coping if you're interested in developing your resilience skills further. The American Psychological Association has an excellent discussion on it. The Anxiety and Depression Association of America, CDC, and several others here are fantastic, and I've referenced them in this talk. These are some resources for continuing education. So I reach out to the Radioactive Digest and Discussion Forum, but also there's courses through Coursera, as well as several different universities' web pages. Harvard has online coursework, Stanford, edX. All of MIT's course materials are available online for free. And then there's astrobiology courses through NASA. And finally, as I mentioned before, this is a great time to initiate projects that are focused on data mining. So I looked for some online resources that are particularly radiation relevant. So there's the NASA Gene Lab, there's the Non-Human Primate Radiation Survivor Cohort. If you're interested in glioblastoma and cancer treatment, there's the Allen Institute has a gene expression map. The Gene Expression Omnibus is a repository where people upload data from a variety of projects, and there are some radiation-focused ones that are deposited in there. And then there are a couple of reviews that actually do a fantastic job on summarizing the various available radiation-specific data repositories, and so I've mentioned them here, and you should really look at those publications if you're interested in that, because they list a ton, and it's a really informative review. So I would like to acknowledge the Radiation Research Society and ECI Group for inviting me to give this talk today, as well as the contributions of several others who expressed their concerns or offered advice and other considerations for what they've been doing to both increase resilience and how to manage their laboratories. And that is the end of my talk. So any questions, comments? I know that we're going to have the session moderated here, but I just wanted to also open it up and say that I'm really interested in improving this talk in the future, and I'd love to hear your comments. So I've provided my email if you had any things that you wanted to share with me personally as well.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Andrews. So one of the questions that we had here is, I know you mentioned remote temperature control and monitoring. Do you have any recommendations that you're currently using, or have you seen anything, or is it more just like your school recommended a certain one?
Our school recommended a certain one. I can pull that up in my email because we're actually trying to get it up and running right now. But I can definitely look up and get back to people on that too.
Okay, yeah, if you could, we'll send that out.
Yeah,
yeah, so that was pretty much one of the only major questions that we had. So Dr. Bailey, if you wanted to close us out here.
Okay, yeah, sure. And I guess I would also just follow up with that last comment a little bit as well, Rachel, and just say, you know, you provided a lot of great information and some, you know, links and websites to places. Could we post those somewhere for people, or, you know, like if you get information about the monitoring of equipment, perhaps we could post that in one of these discussion forums?
Yeah, that'd be great. And my technician actually just texted me and said, Infinite Leap and Viewpoint Monitoring are two systems that we've been working with.
Great, yeah. So it would be really nice to have those kinds of things there available for people. And we might talk with, you know, Veronica and her team, just to the most appropriate place to put these things. But yeah, I think posting them would really be important, and people can use that then as a really good resource going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But yes, thank you so much. I mean, some really excellent ideas and practical considerations for both, you know, how personally we deal with these times as well as professionally, and really be ready to hit the ground running when we all get back to our labs and work. So thank you again, and thanks we had quite a good audience as well, so that's just fantastic. Thank you all for attending, and again, I just point out some of these really great opportunities. Be on the lookout for them, this being just the very first of our education webinars. that really seek to engage, the entire membership, but also great opportunities for ECI and SIT engagement and mentorship. So the idea of these e-journal clubs, I think, as Rachel mentioned as well, are really going to be important, and we have time to do them right now, so we can really take advantage of that. So with that, I think we'll just go ahead and close out, and once again, thank everybody, and thank you, Dr. Andrews, for a really excellent presentation. So thank you. A virtual clap, right?
All right, be on the lookout for the recording of this video. We'll send that out to social media as well as an email. And thank you all for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend.
Thank you too, Jordan.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.